Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you all for coming down tonight. We are live from Books and Books in Coral Gables, Florida, so a note for our internet audience watching at home. If at any time during the presentation you'd like to purchase a copy of tonight's book, you can just call the number on your screen. We'll take care of that for you. We will get the book signed, and we will have it shipped to wherever you are in the United States free of charge. Well, this evening, Books and Books is very pleased to welcome Mr. Benny Lewis, presenting his new book, Fluent in 3 Months, How Anyone at Any Age Can Learn to Speak Any Language from Anywhere in the World. And by the way, those emphases are not mine. Those are italicized. I want to let you know it came straight from the publisher with those italics.
I insisted on the
Absolutely, as well you should. Mr. Lewis, who speaks over 10 languages, all self-taught, runs the world's largest language learning blog, fluentin3months.com. He devotes all of his time to finding better, faster, and more efficient ways to learn languages. In this book, he provides everything you need to make learning a new language fast, intuitive, and fun. Please give a very warm welcome to Mr. Benny Lewis.
Thank you very much. Can I walk up and down? Do they move the camera? Yeah. Hey, how you doing? Okay, for anyone who does not know who I am a failed language learner, okay? I took German in school for 5 years and could not say anything after that. I had nothing to show for it. In Ireland, it's necessary, it's mandatory to take Gaeilge, or Irish as we would call it, for 11 years in my case, and I could not say my name is. I went on, did a degree in electronic engineering, moved to Spain, lived in Spain for 6 months, and couldn't speak any Spanish after that. So, at the age of 21, I could only speak English, and I kind of thought I didn't have the language gene. I've already tried and failed, so it's too late for me. Now, the book, Fluent in 3 Months, actually talks about what I did over the last 11 years to change from that monolingual, could only speak English, to a successful language learner. Since then, I've been a professional translator. I've been interviewed on TV and the radio in multiple languages. I have a YouTube channel with, I think, something like somewhere between 5 and 7 million views. Most of the videos are not in English. And my blog gets about 1 million visitors a month, where I encourage people to learn languages. So how I got from that only speaking English stage to a more successful language learner stage is what the book is about. But ultimately, for me, the book was not going to be a chance for me to just say, do all of these things I did, because I don't think that's as effective. I could tell you what I did, but you have a different learning style. You might have different preferences in language learning. And I didn't want this to be about the Benny Lewis method. I made the book about comparing successful language learners to unsuccessful language learners and seeing what the two of them have in common and what makes a successful language learner. So, and I talked to many people. I've lived in countries where people are in similar situations to myself, only speaking English, despite living there for months. And I talked to people who speak 12, 20, even 50 languages in varying degrees and seeing what makes them tick. So I start the book off with what I think is the most important thing that separates the two of them, and that's mentality. You may not think this, but you can think yourself into being a bad language learner. There's a quote from Henry Ford that I like a lot, and that's, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. So if you're telling yourself, I'm too old, I don't have any time, I have to take care of my family, I failed previously, you go through all of these different reasons. If you're devoted to those reasons, you will not be able to learn your target language, because that devotion is what's going to hold you back. So what I do in chapter 1 is I go through 20 of the most common excuses, because let's face it, that's what they are, excuses, for why people don't learn a language, and I demolish them. First, I'm too old. People always say I'm past the cutoff age, like it's some actual thing that they say, oh, you know, it's like 14 or it's 6. I mean, I forget where the drunk blind man threw his dart, which number it landed on. It's somewhere between 0 and 20. So that's the cutoff age. And I'm past it, so I can't learn a language. Now, I've tried to find some research about this to see why does it happen? Can we figure out a way around it? But there has never ever been research that says there is a cutoff age after which you can't learn a language. That is not science. That is just things people think that have to be true. What I did find in terms of research was a study by the University of Haifa in Israel that showed that under the right circumstances, adults are better language learners than children. It sounds counterintuitive, but ultimately it's like this. A child is better at learning a language unconsciously. They're better at picking up a language when they're just immersed in that environment. But an adult is better at consciously learning a language. An adult has motivation and passion that a child does not have. A child can't really control how their time is structured. An adult can. And this study showed that the circumstances where an adult was actually thinking and reasoning their way into speaking the language correctly. And they outperformed both children and even teenagers. So you may be a better language learner than you think, no matter how old you are. And I know people in their 70s who have started to learn a language and are succeeding. So it's never too late. Another thing you might say is, I don't have the time. How can I learn a language? I have to do it like 40 or 80 hours a week, and that's the only way to learn. Well, like I said in the book, I wanted to see what the difference between successful and unsuccessful language learners were. And I have not found that successful language learners are people with all the time in the world. Quite the opposite. They tend to be family people. They have a family to support. They may be working not just a full-time job, but maybe 2 jobs. They may have to commute a lot. They may be super busy, and yet they make it happen. And the reason is they're not saying, I don't have the time. They're thinking to themselves, how do I make the time? And to give you an example, there was once when I was very, very busy and still trying to learn a language, and I wanted to even take the time that I would have to walk 3 blocks for my lunch to be learning a language. So I wanted to be learning while I was walking. And I figured out an app that took the image from my camera, made it transparent on the screen with another app that I was using for flashcards, and I essentially studied like this. Without bumping into any lampposts, mind you, most important part. So I even used the time I was walking to be studying. And what about if you're standing in a supermarket line? Take out your smartphone or a little pocket dictionary or phrase book and learn 2 new words. It sounds small, but it all adds up. It adds up very quickly. So you don't say, I don't have the time, you make the time. You make the time, you squeeze out as much as you can, and you eliminate things that take time from your life. Like maybe you watch TV shows that are not enriching your life in some way. Decide, I'm going to take the next 6 months, I'm not going to watch these TV shows that are in the wrong language. If you're learning Spanish, I can highly recommend many telenovelas. They're quite ridiculous and very easy to follow. Usually someone's sleeping with someone else's wife or husband. You know, same story all over and over again. So that's one way to do it, is you cut out anything irrelevant and you make it your passion. You have to make sacrifices. One thing I do not promote is the easy way to learn a language. I don't think that's very useful to people. We need the most effective way to learn a language. And that's hard. It's hard work, and you're going to feel like an idiot sometimes, and that's okay. So that's just 2 examples. There are many other reasons people give, and I try to argue why these are not valid, why you can work your way around them. And then I go on to talk about, well, what about the title of the book, Fluent in 3 months? This brings up a lot of images in people's minds. They think maybe in the book I'm describing these 17 steps that when you follow them, after 3 lunar rotations, you'll speak the language like perfectly. That's not what I'm talking about. Remember what I said? Differences between successful and unsuccessful language learners. And I'm not saying successful language learners all do Fluent in 3 months. No. Something else about that title. It's specific. There's a specific target and a specific deadline. Let me tell you what unsuccessful language learners tend to do. Like I said, I've got a blog. On January 1st, strangely enough, I get this huge peak in traffic for some reason. You know? And I investigated what's going on. And of course, the obvious, people have a New Year's resolution to learn Spanish. And I'm sorry, But that's a miserable goal. Learn Spanish is a terrible goal. Because what does that mean? For a lot of people, that represents an infinitely deep hole that never fills. That you can just keep shoveling grammar, vocabulary, exercises. Just keep doing it forever and ever. It'll never fill because you always can learn more Spanish. Do you know the word for aardvark yet? You're not done. You know? Do you know the subjunctive conjugation of very strange verbs? You're not finished yet. So it goes on forever and ever and ever. So what successful language learners tend to do is they're aiming for something very well defined. So in the book, I describe a bunch of things that you can aim for. So I personally define Fluent, and this will not be something everyone has a consensus for, like beauty. It's a scale. What's beautiful to one person is not to another. But I found from talking to a lot of people that Fluent tends to average out in being somewhere that I would call social equivalency. You can exist in that language in social situations the same way you would in your native language. You can be at like a barbecue, talking to people, telling jokes, hearing them talk between one another, saying things back to them, and existing in that kind of situation without any problems. Maybe you can't talk about the technical workings of something, but you can socialize in the language. And that's what I would call fluency. It flows. It does not mean you have to have no accent. Things can flow even with a bit of an accent. It does not mean you need to know every word that exists. If you don't know the word for something, you talk around it. The language still flows. So there are things it does not mean. You never aim for perfection. Perfection is an inachievable goal, and not a single person here, not a single person there, and not me speaks any language perfectly. If you have goals like, I'm not worthy of saying I speak the language until I don't hesitate, until I can have any conversation a native speaker would have, then these kind of criteria are ridiculous. I hesitate when I speak in English. There are conversations I can't talk about. You know, I don't know anything about baseball and American football, which you guys would just call football, of course. I don't know about it. You start talking about these things, they go right over my head. This does not mean I'm not fluent in English. This means there's more to learn. There are more words and terms I can expand on. And think of that in your target language. There's always more to learn, so accept that. You can't be perfect. You can be constantly improving. So these are things to keep in mind. Have a solid goal that you're aiming for that's not perfection. And I define various different ranges. What about the 3 months? The 3 months, believe it or not, is not some magic number that I did by calculations that has to be the exact amount of months that people need to learn a language. This is something relevant to my life. I've been traveling a lot. 3 months is the tourist visa limit in countries. That's where the number comes from. There's no magic to it. It's literally, I traveled, I had 3 months, I had to deal with that. So maybe you're fluent in 3 months is your family is going to come visit you in 2 months. You're starting from scratch, so you want to get basic conversational in 2 months. Maybe next January you're going to move abroad. Then that's whatever that is, 4 or 5 months. So you want to be a confident speaker in 5 months. You know, maybe next week you're going to France. So you have 1 week to be a confident tourist, to be able to get by pretty well. These are the specific targets and the specific deadlines. There's something relevant to your life. I'm not prescribing follow these rules. You have to find these for yourself, and I talk about how to find those in that chapter. So that's enough starting off. How do we actually do this? How do we learn languages? One of the biggest things that holds people back are words. How can I remember thousands of words that I'm learning in a new language? Well, the great news is if you're learning a European language, especially a Romance language, like Spanish, Italian, French, if you're learning these from English, you actually already know a lot of words. Because in 1066, we had the Norman conquest of England, and this brought in a lot of French vocabulary. Now, I want you to imagine that the conquest had noble people speaking something similar to French, and the poor people were speaking Old English. So this evolved into modern English and having two kind of different versions of English depending on the situation. So, for instance, if someone knocks on your door, you can say, come in, or you can say, enter. Enter sounds a little pompous, you know, but that's actually, you could say that, and that's the way it works in other languages. Like French, you could say entrez, you know. So there are other things you could say, like if you think of a more formal way to say a word. Let's say I'm speaking Spanish, and I forget the word for country. I'm like, I want to say my country is, I forget country. What was country? What was country? And maybe you don't know the word for country. Well, think about it in English. Back in English, what's another way to say country that's more formal, kind of means the same thing? You might say nation. And nation is the same in Spanish, just change your accent. It's nación, you know, nation in French. You change the accent, but the word is the same. All the words, at least 90% of the words that end in ation, A-T-I-O-N, and there are thousands of them, are the same among so many different languages. So you start off with your common vocabulary, the cognates we call them. Now, let's go the other end of the scale. There are so many words that are nothing alike. They don't resemble anything like in your native language. So I'm going to take an extreme example. When I was learning Mandarin, which has so many different words, I wanted to tell people my target, my goal, is to speak the language fluently in 3 months. That was my target. So I wanted to say that word. And that word in Mandarin is mu biao. So that's saying it with the tones. But how do I remember that? Mu biao does not sound like goal. So I came up with a mnemonic. And I talk about that, how to find these mnemonics. So what I thought was, okay, mu biao, well, mu is a falling tone. So I'm going to imagine a cow falling from the sky. Moo! And it falls on the ground. It's not dead though, don't worry. She kind of stumbles to her feet, and I'm thinking it's target. So like I'm walking around looking for target practice, my bow and arrow, and I see the cow. And conveniently on her rear end is painted a bullseye. So I pull back my bow and arrow, but the second part of that was biao. So I think, okay, biao, biao. All right, my arrow's made of bees. I shoot it at the cow, and the cow says, ow! That's biao. Now I've also got the tones, because I've got the falling tone on mu, and I got the level tone in biao, and the level is because my arrow is going straight. So you can incorporate Chinese tones into these mnemonics. If I was learning Spanish, and actually when I was learning Spanish, and I wanted to remember the word for beach is playa, I thought to myself, okay, let's see, playa, playa. It sounds kind of like player. So I imagined this Johnny Bravo style, you know, pickup artist, walking down a beach in Spain, seeing a girl in a bikini saying, hey, pretty mama, and then she just slapped him in the face. It's a ridiculous image, but I thought of this in my head. So whenever I was on the beach, I saw Johnny Bravo's trying to pick up girls in bikinis. Johnny is a player, so the player's on the playa. And you make that association, and it helps you remember the word the first few times. And you don't have to do this all the time. You get used to it, and then you'll be able to say it as often as you like. It just comes to you naturally. Now, you could try to come up with these yourself, but there's a great website, Memrise, M-E-M-R-I-S-E, and I mention all the best resources in the book. Memrise gives you these pre-made mnemonics to help you remember for any language. Okay, so you have this way of learning all the words, but then, of course, most people will tell you, and I agree, the best way to learn a language is immersion. You have to immerse yourself in the language. But there's a big catch with that. For a lot of people, they say, that's all well and good for you. You can go off gallivanting and head to the south of France whenever you want. I have a family to support. I have a job that I can't leave at the drop of a hat. Now, the thing is, I actually, despite what I just said, that immersion is a good idea, I think going to the country to learn the language is a bad idea. Yes, because that's what I tried it and I failed. And I've met a lot of people who've tried it and failed. What happened to me with Spanish was I flew to Spain, and as I was getting off the plane, I was thinking to myself, you know, there's something in the air. I'm just going to breathe in Spanish air and exhale español. And 6 months later, I couldn't say anything. So that doesn't work. Breathing the air does not help you speak the language. You have to immerse yourself. I was not immersed. I was physically in Spain, but I was speaking English all the time. I had English-speaking friends. I thought, just while I settle in, I'll speak a little English. I'll get to Spanish soon. Didn't work. And immersion is using the language all the time. It's getting exposure to the language. And you can do this without leaving the country. You can do it without leaving your room. Are we good? Testing. Yes. So you can do this without leaving your room. This is what I like to call virtual immersion. So let's see how can we virtually immerse ourselves in every other way that we would naturally immerse ourselves. So let's say you're in the country, you're walking around, and you're hearing the language everywhere. So how do you emulate that without traveling? You have streamed radio. So a website I like, tunein.com, gives you a free list of every radio station in the world in every language. And there are several, I think there's like 7 or 8 different ones just in Gaeilge, in Irish. That's for a small language. Imagine what you have for Spanish, for Japanese, for Italian. You could pick any style of music. You could pick any kind of discussion, politics, or nerdy programs, whatever you like. And you could get exposure listening to the language all day long if you wanted to. You can download these, listen to them offline when you're driving or just going for a walk. So you can immerse yourself audibly. You can obviously immerse yourself by reading because you have websites. You have books that you can get ordered to bookshops. You have things that you can read the newspapers online. There are many, many tools. Every article in Wikipedia that you could possibly read, pretty much every one of them has been translated to other languages. So you could read about things that you're naturally using. Find the equivalent of things you normally do in that language. You can have Facebook in many different languages. You can change your operating system to be in many different languages, and your smartphone as well. So that's reading the language. There are many different ways you immerse yourself, but the one that comes to mind the most is interacting with human beings. This is truly using the language, speaking it. And you can do that, of course, thanks to Skype. Without even leaving your room, you could speak the language all day long. One way to do it completely free of charge is to help someone learn your language, a language exchange. You speak in their language for 20 minutes, they'll speak in your language for 20 minutes, and you never have to pay a cent. Completely free, because you're helping one another. Another way is paid lessons, but they're not that expensive. If I wanted to get, like, let's say Japanese lessons here in Miami, we're talking maybe $30, $50, or $100 an hour if I wanted one-on-one. And this is why a lot of us just think, let's do group classes, because then it's cheaper, because I'm spreading the money with other people. I don't think group classes are a great idea, because that's not really using the language. Something a friend of mine once said is languages can't be learned, they can only be lived. And I think living a language is talking it. It's not sitting there zipping it while your teacher talks at you about grammar and vocabulary. You have to interact with the language. So maybe you can get private lessons, but they're very cheap. I got private one-on-one Japanese lessons for a whole hour for $5. $5 an hour, because my teacher is from a cheap town in the north of Japan. I would get French lessons from a professional teacher, very experienced teacher with certification and everything for $15 an hour, because she lives in a cheap part of France. So you can get private lessons very cheap without leaving your house. And this is your chance to speak the language. So as an example, the last 3 years, all the languages I've learned, I have learned them virtually. I moved to Brazil, to a lovely city called Belo Horizonte, right in the middle of Brazil, far from touristy cities. And I was there in Brazil trying to learn Egyptian Arabic. There were no Egyptians anywhere to be found, and I still immersed myself in the language. I was listening to the radio. Every time I went out jogging, I was listening to Egyptian music, Habibi, all the time. You get used to it. Yeah, and actually, love songs are great because they tend to sing slowly, so it helps you understand the lyrics a bit better. And then, of course, I got on Skype and I would speak with a native speaker for 2 or 3 hours a day. It was almost as good as being in Cairo. from a linguistic perspective. So that's how you can immerse yourself without having to buy a plane ticket. Now, the next step I talk about in the book is to try to encourage people to speak the language from day one. Because the way I think a lot of people learn a language is the same way. Imagine a parallel universe where to ride a bike, what people did was, their step one is you get yourself bike riding for dummies. And you start off, it tells you what a pedal is, it tells you what a saddle is, okay. You move on to teach yourself bike riding, which talks about the aerodynamics of how a bike goes and which angle you should turn the handlebars. And then about a year later, you progress to Rosetta bike riding, okay, where you spend hundreds of dollars to click exactly, which color and how do you change the gears and all of these things. And all this time, you're biding your time. You're not ready to ride a bike yet. You're learning. In 5 years' time, the ready day will suddenly appear. You'll have so much knowledge in your brain, you'll be such a great bike rider. That's the way, in this universe, a lot of people are looking at language learning. They think, I just have to study more. Once I study more, I'll just magically start speaking. There was an episode of The Simpsons where Bart goes to France, and he's just kind of hearing French in the background, not trying to speak it. And he's walking around trying to, how can I explain? I'm out in the streets, I got nothing to do. And the policeman comes up to him and he's like, oh, please, these guys are poisoning the wine. And then he's walking away thinking, why can't I learn this language? Sacre bleu, je vais jamais parler français. Oh la la! And he just starts speaking it like that. And that's what people think language learning is. That there's just a magic moment, you'll start speaking it wonderfully. It doesn't work like that. It's like riding a bike. You start and you're going to be like this, and you're going to fall down. And that's what I advise people to do, because that's how you learn. You learn through mistakes. Speak from the start. So I have a whole chapter describing how on earth do you do this. How do you take a few words? You've just learned like 10 words. How can you stretch them into speaking with a human being? Not just at the mirror. You want to speak with a person. So as an example, one problem people have is that the person speaks back to them and they don't understand what's said. So imagine one thing I do when I want to learn a language is I invite someone out for lunch. And I'm like, if we speak in Portuguese, then lunch is on me. Okay? So we're sitting down and, we've already introduced ourselves. We're eating and the person turns to me and they said, blah, 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 blah. And that's all I hear. Gobbledygook. And that's what a lot of us hear is noise. Now you might think, given the fact that I don't understand a single word that was said to me, I should give up. I should just say, I'm sorry, can we just speak in English? I'm not ready yet. And I would say that's crazy. What I just said is obvious because of context. Do you think it's possible I'm saying, I'm quite concerned about the fluctuation of the price of tea in China these days. What's your opinion? Or, this lunch is quite good. How's yours? It's very likely the second one. And that's what a lot of language learning is. You guess. You guess, and sometimes you'll guess right. A lot of the times you'll guess right. And sometimes you'll guess wrong. I've guessed wrong thousands of times, and the earth has not opened up and swallowed me whole. I have lived to tell the tale. And I actually make it a goal to make at least 500, at least 200 mistakes, several hundred mistakes a day. Because then I know I'm using the language. Mistakes are your friend. You're much better speaking and saying something incorrectly, but saying something. You don't want to wait a year until you say, excuse me, kind sir, could you direct me to the nearest bathroom, please? It's better if you just say, bathroom where? Speak Tarzan. Me want go supermarket. It's okay. People understand that. And people are patient. I've been to many places. And yes, sometimes downtown in busy cities, they may not be as nice to you, but everywhere else, people are very friendly. They're very patient. They'll let you have your piece. They'll let you say what you want to say. And they'll help you. The same way, if I said any of those, me want go supermarket to you, you would not say, what are you doing with your personal pronouns? And you put your verb in the wrong place. And you wouldn't say that. You would help them. So speak the language from day one. You will learn so much more that way. So that's fine to get started. Getting started is very important. But how do you get fluent? How do you get to mastery level in the language? Well, the thing is, when I was writing this book, I did not want to say, follow these steps and you'll be fluent. Because it doesn't work that way. People need dynamic learning approaches. Because the way you start learning a language has to be different to the way you learn as an intermediate and the way you learn as an advanced learner. For instance, with grammar, I highly suggest people do not study grammar at the start. It's not going to help you. It's kind of like grammar is the rules of how you tidy up your language. But imagine you had the rules, you learned all the rules about how to tidy up a house before you ever bought furniture. You have to messy up your house a bit before you tidy it up. It doesn't work in reverse. You don't tidy something up when there's nothing there yet. So I recommend people just make mistakes. Speak with mistakes, get your point across, do that at the start. And then at the intermediate stage, then you study grammar. Now when I was in school and I studied German, all I remember was being bored with der, die, das tables and words like accusative, nominative, dative that made me sound like everyone in this country must be a robot, you know? Because that's what it feels. It feels like these like way too structured rules. And I didn't speak any German because of that. Later on, I went to Berlin, I made friends, I spoke broken German. I put the verb wherever the hell I wanted to put it, you know? And people understood me. And then a couple of months in, I went and picked up a big fat grammar book, and I found it fascinating. Despite finding it boring in school, I was like, that's why they say it that way. Because I had context. I had something to tidy up finally. So that's what I suggest, that you have a dynamic learning approach. Learn as a good beginner, then be a good intermediate, then be a good advanced student. Okay? And then for the mastery stage, this is when you start to really absorb the best the language can give you. Literature and movies, and do things appropriate to your level. A mistake I made with Spanish when I started, in those 6 months that I failed, I had many crazy strategies. One of them, like a couple of weeks in, was to pick up El Señor de los Anillos. And I figured, Lord of the Rings, yeah, I'll read that from page 1 to page 1,500. By the time I reach the end, I'll be fluent. And I did it with a dictionary, and I would look up every other word, and it took me a week to get to page 2. That was not a very effective plan to learn a language. So I had to put that aside. But then, later on, when I had a more dynamic approach and appreciated each level, I had enough Spanish that I could pick up 100 años de soledad, 100 years of solitude, and really appreciate it, and only use a dictionary once every other page. And that was me using the language, and reading is a very effective way to improve your vocabulary, to expand your use of the language. But you do it at the right time or with the right materials. In the early stages, it's better to read things like comic books. They're more fun, they're more visual. They give you more context. So that's something I highly recommend. I also have a chapter in the book about specific languages. Why something like Chinese is an easy language when you look at it the right way. I want to convince people that no language is hard if you have the right mentality about it. With Chinese, for instance, people always say, those characters, you know, I'd have to learn all those characters, that's impossible. But it's not that bad. Having traveled in China, lived in Taiwan, when people write using modern technology, and honestly, I have a confession to make. I did not write any book. I typed it. I did not dip a feather in ink and write out Fluent in 3 months. I typed it out because a lot of us type things. And if you want to type Chinese, you don't need to write the characters. You just need to know how to speak it. You sound it out. You want to say hello, ni hao. You write out N-I-H-A-O, sometimes with the numbers to signify the tones. And the computer shows you. And you pick it from that. You have to get used to recognizing characters. That's a lot less work than being able to write them out precisely. So that's a little bit of a shortcut that you can still write Chinese without knowing how to write the characters as long as you could speak it. And learning to speak Mandarin is a lot easier than people think. It's got way less grammatical complexities like a lot of European languages. So I do this with as many different languages as I can. I try to argue why this is a lot easier than you think it is. Now, the last couple of chapters, my favorite chapter to write, chapter 8, was how to pass yourself off as a native speaker. This was a lot of fun to write because this whole chapter for me represented what I had learned as a traveler in going to these different countries. Because that's the context. The context is not that you're recording audio and someone is listening and scrutinizing every syllable and every single phoneme. That's not the real world. In the real world, you walk up to someone and they will pass judgment as they look at you, and they'll kind of think of all these other things. And there's a lot of situations where people might switch to English. And that's a problem. If you want to learn a language, people speak to you, back to you in English, and you might think my language skills aren't good enough. I'd say maybe you're not trying to blend in well enough. As an example, like I said, I learned some Egyptian Arabic in Brazil, and then I went to Cairo to use it, because I like to learn a language before I go, so when I'm in the country, I'm enjoying that country. I'm enjoying the culture. I'm making friends. I'm not indoors studying grammar. I've done that work beforehand. So I arrived with basic conversational Arabic, ready to talk to people. I went up to my taxi man, ready to say everything I wanted to say, and he said, "Hello, sir, where would you like to go today?" in English. And I was like, man, I've traveled thousands of miles. I've been learning for months, and he speaks to me in English. It's dumb. You know, it was disheartening. And it happened to me a lot in my first few days. People would take one look at me and switch to English. And you might think, oh, it's because you're a white Irish guy. But there are white Egyptians, you know? And a lot of people tell me this, that they go to European countries like France and people speak back to them in English. And I would say, maybe you don't look French enough. Have you considered that? Have you tried to look the part? So what I did in Cairo was I sat down in a cafe, pen and paper, and I wrote down everything I could see that was different between Egyptian men my age and myself. And I found, like, I was wearing a baseball cap. They don't tend to wear caps or hats in general, at least in Cairo, so I got rid of the hat. I was very well shaven. They tend to have beards and thick mustaches, so I grew out a beard and a thick mustache. I didn't do a great job. My Facebook friends called it a porn-tash, but I was getting there. And I was wearing like shorts and flip-flops, you know, the idiotic touristy things. And they would wear like, I wear a baggy, woolly sweater. And this is Cairo, hotter than Miami, okay? And I walked around, and I even learned how to walk like an Egyptian. It's not like this. You don't go around like the Bangles all day long. No, you see there are things I did like crossing the road. You want to cross the road like an Egyptian? Don't stop and look left and right like my mammy always taught me. You have to just, like, you know, cars are zooming by 100 miles an hour. You just walk through talking on your phone, not caring. They'll swerve around you and honk their horns, and you'll blend in. And when I did this, I started going to places where people definitely spoke English, like in front of the pyramids. Everyone spoke to me in Arabic. When I replied in broken Arabic, they still spoke back to me in Arabic. So when I've combined that with speaking the language well, I've been mistaken for a native speaker. There's all these little things you do. How are you dressing? What distance are you keeping between people? Like I found in the States, there's this concept of a personal bubble that we don't really have in other countries as much. And when I was first at a barbecue in the States, I was trying to talk to people, and I noticed the strangest thing kept happening. That I started talking to someone, and 20 minutes later, we'd been magically transported over here. I'd be like, what happened? And what happened if you would have time-lapsed us is I would have been moving like this. Because I would say, oh man, we're so far apart, and I'd step in, and the other person would be like, whoa, personal space, man, and step back. And this was because I wasn't considering that I'm in this country. I have to try to act like they do. So try to take this into consideration. What do you do with your arms, you know? What facial expressions do you have? Should you smile more? Should you smile less? Take these things into consideration, as well as speaking the language well. And that's the kind of stuff that will help you blend in and even be confused for a native speaker. Combined with improving your accent, and I talk about all of that. Okay, last two chapters. One is about speaking multiple languages. And I highly recommend you do it one at a time. If you want to speak French and Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Russian, all these things, take it one at a time. There are people I know who can start learning 2 languages at once. I'm not one of them, but they tend to have a lot of experience. For me and for a lot of people starting off, it's better if you focus. Focus on one language, and even focus on language learning rather than saying, I'm going to learn Spanish while training for the Ironman, while learning to become a chess master. Well, don't do that at the same time. Each project is going to be much more successful when you focus. It is your one core existence for getting out of bed for a few months. You make that few months sacrifice and you get your level up. And just repeat that process. And then when you have multiple languages, you maintain them. You don't reach a certain level and then just it freezes there forever. You have to keep going back into it. And every week, I have several hours a day, I'm on Skype. I'm reading newspapers. I'm trying to talk to people. I'm trying to listen to the language, as many things as I can to maintain it. But when I'm in intensive learning mode, it's just one language. Everything else, I accept my other languages might go down a little bit for the next few months. That's fine for adding a new language, but you only do it one at a time. Now, the last chapter of the book, I talk about resources and tools and books and courses. And a lot of people might think this is the first question that comes up. What should I buy? Which course, which teacher should I go to? And I think these are incidental. These are going to help you. A good course is going to help. But ultimately, the whole rest of the book for me was what language learning is about. It's about finding out how to speak. It's about getting over your mental barriers. It's about being confident. It's about figuring out language is a cultural thing and a social thing. This, for me, is the core of language learning. And then after that, you could pick good books, bad books, but you will always find a way. A determined language learner will always learn the language regardless of materials. So that is the book in a nutshell. And with that in mind, I would love to take your questions. So, hit me. Yes?
Yes, okay. Why did you choose Spain as your first country to begin with?
I had just completed a degree in electronic engineering, one of the hardest degrees in Ireland. I had worked so much that I think I only went out like 3 times a year. So I wanted fiestas and siestas. So based only on that, I was like, Spain has sunshine, they party, and they take it life easy. That's kind of what I want right now. And that's the reason I went. And I kind of thought, oh, I'll just pick up Spanish. It'll just magically happen. And that didn't happen. So I did not go with the right mindset that I'm going to learn this language. That made Spanish actually the hardest language I've ever learned. Because I had all of these mental blocks, People always say, is it Hungarian or Chinese? It was Spanish. But I went to Spain because I just want to let my hair down after a really intensive... and if you're in Europe, you can fly to Spain. I'm an EU citizen. I can live there like forever if I want. So easy stuff. Yes?
¿Qué parte de España fuiste?
A Valencia.
A Valencia. ¿Y luego?
Y luego, a ver, un año en Valencia, 2 meses en Barcelona, donde aprendí catalán.
¿Fuiste a Mallorca?
Mallorca no, pero fui a Ibiza.
Ah, claro.
Sí. Y fui a Salamanca para hacer el DELE, diploma de español como lengua extranjera. Y... ¿qué más?
¿Qué parte de España te gustó más?
Fui a Tenerife.
Ajá.
Santa Cruz de Tenerife.
Sí.
Me encantó porque siempre tiene el mismo tiempo, todo el año.
Ajá.
Todo el año hace 25 grados. Perfecto. Yes?
I have a question. I travel a lot, and I tend, when I walk into a store and they say, buongiorno, I freeze. Even though I've practiced what I'm going to say and I freeze on the first word, and I get so embarrassed that I don't know what to say after that. How can I break that freeze?
This problem is people thinking themselves out of the situations. Because you're thinking to yourself, okay, there's a perfect thing I can say here. There's like, a perfect way to introduce myself specifically to people who sell bread. You're thinking like all these great ways to start, and you think yourself to all the things that can go wrong. You're saying, oh, but I don't know the past tense conjugation of that verb I was going to use. And, oh, what if they laugh at me because I'm hesitating? And one way I actually helped this German lady who wanted to speak English. And I wasn't going to speak English to her because I was speaking German. And she said, I want to speak English with those 2 Americans, but I don't know what to say. And I'm too shy, and I'm scared that they'll like laugh at me, and I won't know what to talk about. And I tried to give her some confidence. Oh, you can do this, do that. She's like, no, I'm too scared. So what I did instead with her was she was holding like a glass of Coke or something. And I was like, okay, I'll tell you what. I got this great technique that'll work for you. It involves redistribution of blood, okay? You raise your arm and the blood flows to your brain, and that makes you smarter. And she's like, okay. And I was like, yeah, seriously, this works. And I was talking utter nonsense to her. And I was like, raising her arm and stuff. And this whole time we were walking towards the Americans, I clinked her glass against theirs and I ran away. So she actually had no time to think herself out of things. And she said, 2 hours later, she came to me and she said, I just spent the last 2 hours speaking English for the first time ever, and it was great. And all these doubts that she had, all the things they could laugh about, all the things she couldn't say, she just made it work. And that's the thing with learning a language, especially when you're at that beginning stage. They say, buongiorno, you say back, buongiorno, and you just start talking about whatever. One thing that helps me a lot is if I'm in a lot of situations that are social and I have to introduce myself, is I'll prepare an introduction in advance. A 30-second, my name is Benny, I'm from Ireland. I'm learning Italian because I really like pizza, whatever it is. And you learn this intro, you get someone on Skype to go through it and translate it well. You learn that off by heart, and that's your go-to. So you can say something. You can also have a general intro that like, you're frozen, you just say your general intro. The weather is very nice today, isn't it? And that gives you time, to figure something out. But just always look like you're having fun and try to act like you're having fun. Like at the start, there are so many things I don't know, and I want to say, I want bread, And when someone sees that, then they may feel bad for you, they may speak in English, and you feel bad yourself because you're reinforcing, I'm feeling a total lack of confidence. So just act confident. I try to speak a language like Jack Sparrow would speak a language, We're like, I want bread. And it's ridiculous, but you have fun with it. People think you're a little strange, but they will definitely speak back to you in that language. So it's a kind of a fake it till you make it thing. Like people have told me 1 or 2 weeks into learning a language, wow, you're speaking it very well. And I'm not actually, if someone academic, with like glasses came up and said, this does not pass my specifications. Doesn't matter because the person thinks I'm doing well because I'm acting like I'm confident. And that comes across as, oh, he's confident, so he must be good at his language. It's this subconscious thing. So act like you know. Just be, buongiorno, and throw your arms around. And it makes things a lot easier. But if you're going in kind of stiff and thinking, I don't know what to say, they're going to laugh at me, just, stop thinking about it. Thinking about nothing is the best thing you can have in your head when you want to just blurt out the language. All right? Yes?
So I grew up here in Miami, and I speak Spanish at home with my mom and stuff. And I feel like I'm really close to like tidying it up, but it's like, how do you persevere when you feel like you're just...
Yeah, so if you're stuck at a plateau where you're able to talk about a lot of stuff, you're able to like have a chat, what did you guys do last weekend, you're able to talk about your interests, but you want to really push it up to like advanced level, it's like I was saying, you have to expand your comfort zone. Because there are many languages that I will get stuck at a plateau, and it's because I'm doing the same things over and over again. I'm having the same kind of conversations. Yes, I'm from Ireland, I want to learn Spanish because of this. And that's great at the start. And if you're with your family, you may have similar kinds of conversations regularly, but you push yourself out of that. So with my French, for instance, I really wanted to improve my French. So I got on Skype, and rather than saying, I am living in Spain now, it is fun, I said, I want to talk about something difficult. So my teacher actually, she brought up all these really complicated things. She gave me like people speaking super fast and told me, explain what they just said. And I was like, my brain is melting. Oh my God, they're speaking so fast. Another one is she asked me like hard questions. What's your opinion on gay marriage? And I defended. I was like, I think gay marriage should go ahead because of this and this. She's like, okay, now argue against gay marriage. And I was like, what? And I had to think of words that I would not have normally used and an opinion that I didn't have. And it forced me out of my comfort zone. So you do situations that force you to use the language in a way you did not use it normally. And reading is very effective for that. When you read a language at the advanced stages, you're learning all these new words and you're keeping your level up. So if you're already at a confident conversational stage, you don't necessarily need more conversational practice. You need to do harder things. And in Miami, I imagine there are quite a lot of meetup groups for many different things, especially in Spanish. So you might go to a Spanish chess club meetup, you know, or a Spanish meetup for various different topics and use Spanish as the language. Rather than going to a Spanish language meetup, hang out with Spanish people who are talking about playing cards and play cards through Spanish. Use it for many different situations. That'll expand your use of the language, and then you'll get over that final barrier. Yes?
Do you have a favorite language?
I do have a favorite language. It is Portuguese. And the only reason, it's not because that future subjunctive, oh, makes my mouth water. No, it's because I lived in Brazil, and I find Brazilians very friendly. And for me, language and culture are intertwined. So your favorite language is not because of how it sounds or something, it's because of how you feel when you speak it. Yes?
Do you and how would you advise to pick a regional variation of a language when you start to learn? I mean, at the end you should understand most accents, but in the beginning you want to focus on one thing.
Okay, what I recommend is there tends to be a lot more resources for the standard dialect. Like, let's say I was learning French, you will find way more resources and things to listen to online in Parisian French. And you do this up until an intermediate stage, and then you see where are you going to actually use the language. If you're moving to Canada, then you want to learn Canadian French. But the problem is, if you want to learn a dialect, you can't necessarily get Canadian French for dummies, you know. You have to learn normal French, and then you can get a book by a friend of mine, actually, Le Québécois en 10 leçons. And that teaches you how to speak French from Quebec in French. Because this is for French people who want to appreciate the dialect. The same way, you could do the same in English. There are books in English about how to speak like with British expressions and Cockney English and so on. And you're more likely to find those books in the original language. So I would say focus on learning the language in general first. Because it's a little harder if you're focusing on one dialect, especially if you don't have a priority. Like if you just know, I'm moving to Peru, then you want to talk to Peruvians as a priority and maybe learn their slang earlier. But if you don't know yet, I would stick to the standard version. You'll find it in most courses. You'll find it's the one used in written text, and you can learn that. And at an intermediate and advanced stage, then focus on one dialect.
Would you say when you're sourcing a teacher online, they would be able to speak the standard version?
Absolutely, especially if it's a professional teacher, they will know to speak. Like I was an English teacher, for instance, and when I was teaching English in Italy and Spain, I would not actually speak to them in slang from my town in Ireland, you know. I know they were studying standard British English. I wouldn't speak with a British accent, but I would use British words. I would say things very clearly. I would say, I would like to go, instead of, I like to go too. You know, I don't squash the words together. And a lot of teachers do that. They will speak the standard version. They'll use the formal words to ease you in, and then they kind of branch off, depending on the teacher and the style that you want them to do. Yeah. Yes?
Eu amo falar português também.
Pode.
É um idioma belíssimo.
Você vem de onde? Qual país?
Venezuela.
Ah, é?
Sim, eu sou latino, mas estou praticando português e falo com meus amigos brasileiros. São legais.
Eu ouvi falar que tem muitos brasileiros aqui em Miami.
Sim.
Tem?
Exatamente.
Tem aqui. Pode falar português depois.
Eu não falo português.
Ah, tá falando! Tá falando. Okay. Yes?
What motivated you to learn Japanese?
I have only ever chosen the language because I want to explore the culture. So it took me a long time to get to Japanese and Chinese, not because I was like afraid of them or something. I just never had on my travel itinerary to go to those countries. So Japan, a year and a half ago, I was like, I actually want to go to Japan now. And that motivated me to learn a little Japanese. And like, this is the thing. A lot of people might learn a language because it's a challenge, and that's great. But for me, it's always about, I want to use this with people. And I always tell this to people, I'm not actually passionate about learning languages, because I see a language as a door. It's a means to an end. A language opens you up to a new culture. And this is always the reason for me. I would learn this language because I want to explore this culture. No matter what that language is, a small language, a big language. So I wouldn't be motivated by how many people speak it, because ultimately a small language like Irish is worth learning because there are enough people to speak to, even if there's just a few tens of thousands of people. That's enough conversations for many lifetimes. So I would never pick a language because the number of people who speak it, or because it sounds cool or it'll impress people. It's just, I want to explore that culture at that time. Yeah. Yes?
I learned Japanese by watching anime, Japanese videos.
Yeah.
And then, do you recommend that way to learn the language, or?
Absolutely, because the one thing you want to make sure is that it's fun. You want to enjoy learning the language. And anime and reading manga, these things are great, or comic books in other languages. These are great because you have visuals, it's fun, you can kind of follow along, and it's appropriate to beginner learners as well because you have a lot of action. Whereas if you're reading a dry academic text, you could get lost very quickly. But even if you don't understand what's happening, you see a lot of people zapping and like, things coming out of their hands and all these things. And that's fun. And that kind of helps you when you're thinking, man, I don't understand what they're saying. But at least there's a lot of shining lights and explosions.
Yeah, I actually didn't try to learn the language. I just realized I could speak it after years.
And that's great, because through a lot of exposure, you start to understand more and more and more. So I always, at the start especially, later on, I'll get things that are heavier, maybe not as much fun, but are still very interesting. But at the start, you want to make it as engaging as possible. It has to be fun, okay? A couple of languages, and then a couple of questions, and then we'll get to signing. Yep.
I have a friend that is learning several languages at one time, and he interweaves it with a hobby of his of stamp collecting, which he's very serious about.
Okay.
But a lot of the stamps he has are not collectible stamps, but he loves the stamps anyway. But he puts them on the back of a flashcard, and then he has a word and its translation on the card. But I wondered if you would advocate anything like that, or if it works for you, it works for you.
Well, like flashcards, I definitely use flashcards. I got an app on my phone for flashcards.
You're reading it with something that you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually learned a lot of my Portuguese, for instance, by getting windsurfing lessons. I was living in Brazil, and I didn't want to go to like Portuguese lessons. I wanted to actually use the language, because my windsurfing teacher, he didn't speak a word of English. He didn't know what an object and accusative and all these technical things were. He wanted to help me learn something different. And like in Portuguese, for instance, there's a false friend. Puxa actually means pull. Doesn't mean push. And if you're like windsurfing and suddenly he's like, puxa, I'm like, okay. And then you like fall over. And that gives you good motivation to learn the language. And it really does. And that's the thing. You have to remember, a language is a means of communication. Don't learn a language just to talk about language learning. You want to combine it with your passions. So I'm passionate about travel, and I will go to people and I'll talk about travel through the language. Passionate about computer games, so I'll play the computer game in the language. If you're passionate about stamp collecting, I would absolutely collect stamps in a way that helps you practice the language. You combine it with your passion. Absolutely. Yes?
Okay, I have a question. So happy that you're here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, German is a language that I tried to learn last summer, and I don't have much of an opportunity to learn it here. You mentioned Skyping. How would I go about finding someone on Skype to talk with?
Yeah, there's a website I mentioned in the book called italki. So that's the letter I, TALKI.com. And this can connect you with people who are native German speakers. But another thing people always forget, if you want to practice your language, you do not have to do it with native speakers. You can find other people learning German. You can go to this website, find people learning German. You can also go on Couchsurfing. Couchsurfing is this website people use for free accommodation while they travel. And I actually don't use it for that. I use it because I can search per language. And I would search Miami, German speakers, and I would just message German speakers. They don't even have to be native as long as they're like advanced speakers. And I say, hey, can we get like a lunch sometime? It's on me if we speak in German. You know, you find opportunities. You go to a lot of different websites and see German meetups in Miami. You'll see meetup.com, Couchsurfing, like I mentioned. There's Facebook groups that might gather people together. You try to speak the language in person. You'll find a lot of ways to do that. And then online, Skype. Just Skype native speakers who in Germany, there may not be as many people who want to learn English, but maybe they want to learn Spanish. You can help them with that. And there might be people who are Americans or British or Irish or other people who speak really good German and just want to practice, and they'd be happy to help you. Okay? Maybe final question, and then I'll go to signing books. Okay.
Thank you. I was wondering how you felt when you realized that you had this incredible ability to speak really incredibly well and with an amazing accents, all the languages that you speak.
Well, I'll tell you the biggest realization for me, or in Spanish they say cambiar del chip, where you kind of, your whole mentality changes, was in Spain, not when I was speaking with a great accent, not when I was able to talk about whatever, but just 2 weeks into when I really got into speaking Spanish, speaking it wrong. I bought an electric toothbrush and it broke. And I was thinking, I want my money back. And I was so angry, I just grabbed the toothbrush, I walked to the supermarket, and I realized I haven't like looked up in the dictionary how to say toothbrush. I don't know how to say broken. I don't know anything. So I just said what I could say. I said, tooth, no work, money. And I said it with conviction, you know? And I said those words in Spanish, like really passionately, and I got my money back. And I realized in that point, that was my biggest realization, that was the moment in my head I was like, I can speak Spanish. I mean, I'm butchering it. It's terrible. I'm not going to be debating Kantian epistemology anytime soon, but I can achieve something through this broken Spanish. And that for me was a much bigger realization than, oh, I can speak multiple languages. Oh, I have an accent. It's the start. And that's why I tell people, you should be a good beginner learner, because beginning a language is a wonderful time. I know a lot of people are like, yeah, my language is worthless because I'm not an advanced, I'm not fluent, I'm not mastering the language. But when you're really happy with being a beginner, you'll advance much quicker. And that was my biggest realization. I could speak Spanish with just a smattering of words. Okay? So, with that in mind, I'm going to start signing your books, but I want you to do something for me, because there may be more than 2 or 3 people waiting to talk to me. I want you to take today and the people here as an opportunity to maybe get some language practice. So imagine this. Imagine I'm Antarctica and this is the world, okay? So from my perspective, south, north, west, and east. So we have Latin America here. So I would recommend, if you want to practice some Spanish or Portuguese, come to this side and try to, hablas español, and work your way up. Even if all you say is, hello, nice to meet you, my name is. Start using it. So use a little Spanish or Portuguese, or if you're learning English, then come up here where the UK would be. If you're learning any other European language, around here, you're learning Czech, Italian, anything like that. If you're learning Swahili or Arabic, kind of come to the Africa area. And then any Asian languages, come to this side of the room. And find people and try to practice. And say something. Don't worry about saying it wrong. In fact, you get awards. You get a gold star for every mistake you make, because that's bringing you closer to using the language. So with that in mind, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Really appreciate it.
I hope you brought the gold stars. Quick reminder for our internet audience watching at home, you could still call the number on your screen, purchase a copy of the book, we'll get it signed for you, and we'll ship it to wherever you are in the United States free of charge. For those of you who are watching overseas, please limit your commerce with Books and Books to English or Spanish. For those of you here in the house, the book is for sale over there, and Benny will be signing over here at the table to the left of the podium. Thanks very much.